on transparency under the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement. And we have with us again our knowledgeable resource persons from the WTO, Mr. Mateo and Mr. Erik. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you've had a restful evening and are ready for the third and sadly final day of this wonderful workshop. We, instead of starting with conformity assessment, which is what was on the schedule, we thought that it may be better to hit it off with transparency, which was meant to be delivered yesterday, but because the program is so rich, it was a little tight. So we'll start with this. It's basically two presentations. The first one focuses on the obligations, and we have covered this already a little bit, so I may go, let's say, at a fast pace, but if at any moment you have a doubt, a question, I'm going too fast, please feel free to interrupt, to raise your hand. The idea is to solve all your queries, your doubts. And then after this general presentation on the obligations, we will do a demonstration of EPING, which is this online tool that we have for TBT and SPS matters. So let's get started on transparency. Maybe just by way of a very brief introduction. So why is transparency important? So I think we have already alluded to this quite a bit over the last couple of days, but let's quickly go through this. So as you may remember from Erik's presentation, when we were talking about non-tariff measures, NTMs, and he had this image of a cloud, and basically this notion that now most of the measures affecting trade happen behind the border, and therefore there is this added difficulty of obscurity, right? It's much easier to find out what are the tariffs that a country is applying, and you can, find usually all of that at the WTO very quickly or in the customs code or the like. But it is a lot more difficult to know all the requirements and regulations that apply to products. So that's why transparency with respect to regulations, both on TBT and SPS matters, are absolutely crucial. And they are basically what allows exporters to know what are the requirements they need to comply with, and therefore that's what enables trade. So it has an important market access connotation. Then, of course, transparency is also a precondition for good regulatory cooperation, because unless we know what the rules in other countries are, then we cannot really engage with them. We cannot even really know that we may have a problem, a query, a question about those things. So transparency underpins good regulatory cooperation, particularly at the WTO. So even yesterday when we were speaking about the committee and the STCs, it is very often sometimes for an STC to begin with, we have a problem because you have not notified this measure. So please notify the measure. And on top of that, by the way, we already started doing some research and we have questions about A, B, and C. So that's another sort of important aspect. And maybe as a corollary, of course, the more transparency you have, the more you can have this trust that is needed, not only for regulatory cooperation among authorities, but also between traders, between exporters, importers, authorities. And I think this is also where the issue of conformity assessment comes in. You may recall that one of the main messages yesterday for that part was conformity assessment activities are what allows trust to be built among the key stakeholders with respect to trade regulations. So that was just by way of introduction. Now let's quickly go through some of the transparency obligations found in the TBT agreement. So first, there is a basic but very important transparency obligation found in Article 15.2 of the TBT agreement, which is what is known as the Statement of Implementation. It is basically a notification notification that every WTO member must do to indicate to the TBT committee how it intends to comply with the obligations of the TBT agreement. So every member, or most members have done it, and actually a large number of members have done it several times, because maybe the way you intended to comply with the TBT agreement in 1995 is different from the way it is done now. So even actually now many members are notifying their national quality infrastructure laws, because of course now there is a much better understanding and acknowledgement that national quality infrastructure, of course, is basically the ecosystem that allows for the adoption of proper technical regulations and conformity assessment. So in that context, many members are now presenting notifications with respect to the statement of implementation under Article 15.2. Of course, we have spoken about this many times. There is this obligation to notify draft technical regulations and draft conformity assessment procedures. And once again here, it's absolutely central to remember that the TBT and the SPS agreements are unique within the broad family of WTO covered agreements, because they are the only two agreements that require members to notify these measures when they are still in draft form. And we will see a few timelines in a little bit so that you see how it's important. Then there is also this obligation to publish the final regulations on a national gazette, for instance. That doesn't translate in the agreement per se on an obligation to notify that final regulation, but the committee over the years has actually recommended as a good practice to also notify that final regulation, and that's actually what's happening nowadays in the large majority of cases. Then we have some obligations with respect to the notification of standards, but as we have discussed as well, it is not the same as the obligations with respect to technical regulations and conformity assessment procedures. The notification obligations with respect to standards are found in the Code of Good Practice, and they differ in that simply here the national standards body must publish at least every 6 months its work program, and that's the way transparency with respect to standards is performed. And then of course we have a very, and we will see this in more detail in a moment, there is this very important obligation found in Article 10.1 of the agreement, which requires establishing an inquiry point to address concerns, questions, queries from all members and their stakeholders. So, why is transparency important? What's needed for government officials, for exporters, for the private sector? Well, first, thanks to the transparency obligations, you have these inquiry points that you can use to get more information on the regulations of your trading partners. You can also, thanks to that, inform your own stakeholders, and we will see in the second presentation on transparency how EPING is a very useful, practical tool that you can use to be in touch with your stakeholders. Of course, thanks to transparency, you can learn about new regulatory developments in your export markets, and if you have to change your processes and production methods or the characteristics of your products, thanks to transparency, you will have at least some time to adapt to those new requirements. Then of course, and here once again, we will see this in more detail when we talk about EPING, but thanks to the transparency obligations, you can also submit comments on the draft regulations of other members. And this is very important because other members are required to take your comments into account. So as a result, if you have a very serious concern about an issue, you can express your views, and maybe they could lead to an adjustment, a change in that originally proposed regulation. Then you can even request an extension in the commenting period, so that's maybe just a little extra something, but it helps, and often members do request an extension for the commenting period. And then, of course, thanks to transparency, and this links very well with our discussion yesterday on the committee, you can learn about maybe something that will really affect you, and therefore you may be prompted to raise a concern, be that bilaterally or multilaterally in the committee. So all of these is thanks to the transparency obligations in the TBT agreement, which are once again unique compared to all the other covered agreements except the SPS agreement, which has very similar obligations. And all of these, of course, facilitates trade. So this is why I think in their wisdom, the negotiators of the TBT agreement realized that it was important to go further when it comes to transparency. So maybe we do a little quiz just to get started. You may remember that as a regulator, one of the first things you need to know is you need to know if you need to notify your measure. You need to know if you need to notify your draft measure. And when we talk about regulations, you need to know if you should notify under the SPS agreement or under the TBT agreement, because you may remember that they have a scope that is mutually exclusive. So normally, in most circumstances, a measure is either an SPS measure or a TBT measure. So maybe just to see, to get started, to warm up a bit. So we have two measures. One is there is a virus infection confirmed in Bangladesh, and in order to prevent the introduction of this virus, the importation of live horses, swine, dogs, and cats from Bangladesh has been banned. Is that an SPS measure or a TBT measure? SPS. Great, absolutely. Now let's take a look at the other example. We have some regulation stipulating the quality standards for the different grades of groundnuts and requirements for the marking and packing of groundnuts. Is this? Yes. Oh, fantastic. Okay, Erik, we can go back to Geneva now. This is really good because this is a key central issue, and it's at the very beginning of the regulatory process. So it's always important to begin with that, because indeed, if the measure is one that pursues one of the objectives covered by the SPS agreement, you need to notify under the SPS agreement, and if not, then it's likely to be a technical regulation covered by the TBT agreement. So that's step one. Now, let's take a look at another question, and I think we covered this a little bit, but it's important to refresh our minds. So, which of these two statements is the better statement? So, statement A says, members are required to notify their new technical regulations if they are not in accordance with relevant international standards and if they may have a significant effect on trade. That's the first one. The second statement is, members are required to notify all their new technical regulations to the WTO. Good. This is a tricky one, and that's the reason why we create this slide, because just to have like a final refresher on that point. So, strictly speaking, if you go to Article 2.9 of the TBT agreement, which is the one that has the disciplines on transparency for technical regulations, you are required as a member to notify your draft technical regulations if they are not based on an international standard and if they will have a significant effect on trade. So that's statement A. However, very interestingly, even from the very beginning of the TBT committee's work in 96 and 97, members realized that that was actually perhaps not good enough. Because you know what's the problem with transparency? Transparency, as we just saw, is good, right? So they issued a series of recommendations. So they are not legally binding, but they are very, very powerful recommendations recommending members to notify their draft technical regulations, even when they are based on international standards, and even if you know the effect of trade is not necessarily significant. So in practice, statement B is something that you see on a daily basis. Members tend to notify their draft technical regulations even when they are based on international standards, and even if the effect of trade is let's say small, or even if it facilitates trade. The whole idea is to provide more transparency, not less transparency. So maybe just like, I think we just covered this, so there is no need to go over, but basically, if in doubt, notify. It's better to provide more transparency but less transparency. Now, this is a bit technical, but just so that you see the full spectrum of possibilities. So there are 4 types of formats that the Secretariat has developed for notifications. The first one is the regular format for notification. So that happens when you have a draft technical regulation. And we will see when we take a look at EPING. So if you have a draft technical regulation, it's just coming from the regulatory process, you use a regular format. But then of course later down, let's say you notify that draft technical regulation, and then eventually the measure was adopted, let's say 6 months later or 1 year later. Then you can actually notify the final text. How do you do that? You do that through an addendum, because that allows them, all members, to have a very clear chronology of events, and it will all be numbered. So let's say in this case, if it's India, it would be G/TBT/N, notification, /India, IND, and then you have a number. So let's say in this case it's 1,000, and if there is an addendum, then you see addendum, and you can have 1, 2, 3 addendums. Then if you make a small clerical error, you can of course notify a corrigendum, and then if there is a substantial revision of that measure, then you can also notify those changes through a revision. So this is simply the formats, and you can find them all on the TBT gateway, and they are all on EPING. This is simply just an example of a notification so that you see how they look. This is a measure notified by the United States of America in 2017. You can see that at the top, on the box number 2, you see which is the agency responsible for that measure, so that allows you to know maybe which is the authority. If you want to reach out to them directly, if you have a contact, then you know where to knock. Box 4 is very important because it tells you the products covered. So here, for instance, this is a measure about textile fiber products, and then there is this clear tendency for members to try to add as much as possible either HS codes or ICS codes, so that then it's easier to locate through the databases. You have also in box 6 a brief description of the content, so that's very helpful, because then, let's say, if you're on the other end, if you're trying to follow regulatory developments in the US in the textile sector, then you can very quickly see if this is something that you should pay closer attention to. Then it tells you, very importantly, in box 10, the final date for comments. Then you realize, okay, no, this is actually that may affect us. So let's get in touch with the other agencies, let's get in touch with the industry association, let's get that feedback. And once again, this is something that, thanks to EPING, can now be done very, very easily. Because we know that we have to provide comments by the 31st of July. And then you have a link to the text where you can actually see the full text of the draft measure. And then, two questions. Great. So maybe here, you have a question as well? Yeah. So maybe we start with the lady and then...
Can we go back to the... Yeah, it's written, the date of notification is 6th of July and the final date of comments is 31st July. That means there's not the 60 days comment period. And secondly, we have often seen, sometimes we have seen, especially notifications from the European Union, I'm talking in context of SPS because I handle those more, that they don't have a comment period. That means already notified, they just adopted and notified, something like that. So that is also permissive under the WTO.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, these are a great question, and maybe Erik will jump in here as well. Of course, all of these obligations, they're there, but they depend on the good faith and the good efforts of the authorities and the people that present these notifications. So, the agreement, strictly speaking, requires giving a reasonable period of time for the provision of comments. That's what the agreement says. That's the legal obligation in the treaty. But once again, since the early days, the committee agreed that, in principle, this reasonable period of time should be understood to be not less than 60 days. That basically means that, thanks to that decision by the committee, members aim to give at least 60 days for the provision of comments. Now, of course, unfortunately, it's not always the case. And there could be a wide variety of reasons why that is. But even, let's say, when that doesn't happen, members, if this actually becomes an STC, the first thing they mention is either you haven't notified or the comment period was non-existent or too short. You need to give the 60 days. So, of course, it's a bit of a less than ideal situation, right? Because maybe the comment period is finished, but members do put peer pressure on each other to make sure that looking forward, this comment period of 60 days is complied with, because it is very important. And maybe Erik would want to supplement.
Yeah, maybe just first, good morning everyone. Maybe just 2 points. The first was that I think the average time, if you look back over all the years since '95, the average time that members give for comments is around 59, 58 days. So it's quite close, but it's not exactly 60 days. Some give that much longer, some shorter. I already forgot the second point. No, the second point was that some members tell us that, I have often got calls that, oh, the measure has already gone into force. Should I notify or not? And then we always say it's better to notify. So, because you at least are providing information about the measure that has gone into force. So members do notify even when the time is too short, non-existent, or maybe it has passed. Because as Mateo says, if another member really has a problem, the first thing they will say, you didn't even notify this, let alone give time for comment. So, yeah, I think that's the main point. It's always better to notify, to provide the transparency, than not at all.
Yeah, okay, a rebuttal, that's good.
In that case, notifying WTO is an obligation, but it's not mandatory.
The notification is an obligation.
It's an obligation, but it's not mandatory.
Well,
It's an obligation. It's an obligation, it's mandatory. I think what Mateo was saying.
But the comment period is not like.
You have to give a reasonable period of time. That's the word.
exactly, reasonable.
So that's
That's
also
the
mandatory.
obligation.
That's
But
also
then,
mandatory.
like if some notifications have already been brought in force and they notify after that, that is, there is no comment period given on in that case, then what happens in those cases?
Yeah, if no comment period is given, it's a difficult obligation. Once you haven't done it, it's a difficult obligation to fix, right? Like it's not like how do you repair that damage? It's almost like time has passed. So in that sense, it can be a little bit unsatisfactory. But members keep bringing up the issue when it doesn't happen because they know that systemically putting that pressure on is good because then it may actually lead to, let's say, a better record looking forward. And I think maybe that's the big picture that they try to keep in mind.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is the same, but I think this is a great facilitation measure. Nobody will object for that, so they may be given the date as very short period. Because it is, they are removing some requirements, so that facility, when we are bringing that, it is an obstacle, looks like obstacle, it's a barrier. You need to give that time period 60 days so that they will give the comments. But they are removing the barrier, so nobody will maybe give a positive comment or it will not affect them that way because they are facilitating that.
Interesting, yeah, that's a very interesting point. Thank you for the observation. Maybe one.
Often, when we look at these notifications, in the process of building the database at the center, I had faced this issue of, HS code not being there. Very clearly on the fourth row, it mentions products covered, HS and CH. Whereas, what is provided here is ICS code. Okay, so one has to go look up this ICS code and, which are the products it covers and, assign an HS code. Only then you come to identify what is the trade measure which was brought out and how it's going to impact. Only then you can, but whereas with respect to tariff, that's the difference. Tariff is, you can actually fight the barrier in very clearly specified in the schedule itself, tariff schedule itself. But here what happens is non-tariff measures, about 80% of these notifications. I have built a database on SPS and TBT notifications. It's available at the center of all the WTO members. It does not provide HS code. And that's my observation. And it's improving. As you said, it's improving. But this has been, as you said, I think you mentioned something about 80% of the there is HS code. I'm not sure that it's 80%. It's maybe improved to 50%.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's a great observation, and I'm not sure about the figure. For that, I would need to ask.
50% is an upper limit.
Yeah, but this comment by the gentleman is very important because it also underscores the difference between customs duties and these regulations. Customs duties are always associated with an HS code because at the border there will be an officer and they will have to check, okay, what is this? Is it coming under which line? So they will know exactly the code. But for regulations, it can be so broad that it's not quite the same. And the agreement itself does not require, as a legal obligation, the specification of HS codes. However, the colleagues working on transparency in this area in SPS for years have really been inviting, exhorting members to provide that information, and many trainings have been devoted to this. And I think thanks to that, now the record is a bit improving, because as the colleague mentions, these codes are crucial when you're looking at databases, when you're actually trying to understand whether it will affect your product or not. So hopefully in the future we'll have an even better code. I think maybe Anwar would like to comment.
Just to comment on what Lee was saying, in fact, the agents wanted also earlier IMS system was capturing HS codes, and now in the EPIC it is not captured, and you did mention it is an issue. But the reality is the Secretariat cannot compile something, assign some code which the members themselves are not given. And when you look at the format does not have an obligation to provide what is the HS code for that particular product. So it's a kind of a binding situation while it is required, but the format is not. Along with the CAP discussions, we are also having a working group on transparency in which United States is trying to insert one small change in the format, and they have the hue and cry from the rest of the membership saying, we cannot touch with the format. So it's up to the institutions, research institutions, to go into the notifications and pull out the HS codes. I don't think it is something that will be resolved anytime soon.
Thank you so much. One final comment.
Regarding this HS code, in telecom, under one HS code, there could be 100 products. We are issuing regulation on only 10 or 15. So, if you give an HS code on this notification, tomorrow customs will be confused whether which other products are covered under this notification or not. So that is a quite confusing thing. So we are giving a very broad at 8517 something like, not given to a specific 6 digit or 8 digit codes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that observation. Yeah, it really underscores the challenge behind this mammoth task.
Yeah. Maybe just a comment to say that this issue with HS codes is significant, and I think now that there's more and more use of e-ping and there's more and more attention to notifications, there's also more and more questions about data collection, and the importance of HS codes, as was mentioned, is becoming more apparent. So just to say that in June, I think it's the 19th of June, there will be a special meeting of inquiry points on transparency issues. And there will probably be one session that is dedicated only to HS codes. So that is the moment to bring these issues up. Because it's at the WTO, and it is, as Anwar says, we need to find a way of making it almost mandatory to provide this HS code definition, even if it's at the very top level, not down to the 6 or 8 digits, but at the top level, or 4-digit level. That would help us, but we need some kind of an incentive to do this in the format itself. So we think of that date, 19th of June, and bring these issues then to the WTO.
Perfect. Okay, so we will move on. Just maybe one final question. Okay, sure.
Hi, so my question is a bit unrelated to the present discussion. It's with respect to the statement of implementation. So the statement of implementation, the two countries give it once they've started notifying measures, or it's at the initial stage as to how they will implement the TBT agreement. So is there a time limit with respect to giving the statement of implementation, or how is it done?
That's a great question. I mean, the obligation stems from Article 15.2, so you can take a look at that specific text. But basically, the idea is to provide that notification at the outset, even before you start notifying measures. Why? Because you are basically providing transparency with respect to the broader regulatory framework that will allow you as a member to comply with the obligations in the TBT agreement. And now that regulatory framework may include issues related to quality infrastructure, standardization, accreditation, metrology, the like. But maybe in '95 it was something even more basic. And you can update that statement as often as you want as a member. If you have some key developments in your regulatory frameworks, if you have, let's say, a major constitutional change, then you can provide an update. Thank you. Okay, so maybe just to move on in the interest of time. So we have that notification and we have the addendum, simply just to show you. So now you have a final measure. So the US here provided this addendum. So you see in the top right the same figure, 1299, and then add 1. And then they indicate as of which date the measure was effective, so February 2018, and then you have a link to the final text of the measure. So the idea is that members do this more and more often. This, I think we can move on, because I think it's clear by now, right? Like, measures need to notify before the measure is adopted. So that's clear. Simply, just so that you can see it graphically. So this is sort of the time frame for the regulatory process, and simply just to know that what the agreement requires is first to publish the notice, let's say in your internal gazette. As soon as you do that, you notify to the WTO, and then before it's adopted, you need to give the famous 60 days, which is once again a decision by the committee, this figure, the 60 days. Then there is one exception, of course. The agreement provides for the possibility of notifying urgent measures. Once again, we had this sad recent example of the COVID-19 pandemic, but of course, the agreement, the negotiators in their wisdom, they realized that it was important to provide for that. So look at this notification from Canada. It's in the context of the pandemic, and it's an urgent notification. The products covered are medicines, and the idea is to create flexibility for the authorization process so that the COVID-19 pandemic would be more easily and more efficiently addressed. So in this case, the entry into force of the measure is immediately. So there is no need to give the 60 days, and also there is no need to grant time for adjustment. You can adopt the measure, but there is still this obligation to notify it. So just to perhaps show you that example. And then I think we've covered this, but just so that you see, so then after you adopt, you in principle need to give at least 6 months between the adoption of the measure and the entry into force. And the rationale is very simple, is basically to give producers, exporters, the time to adjust to any change in circumstances that may affect them. I think we just because we're running a little bit out of time. So this is just to show you. This is the gateway where you can find information on the Code of Good Practice, which applies to standards, and there you can find the work program of every national standards body that has accepted the Code of Good Practice. So there you can find, let's say, the work program of the Bureau of Indian Standards, or let's say if you are interested in the EU or the US market, then you can go look them up as well, and you will see their work program so that you can be aware of the standards that they are currently developing and the ones that they have recently published. Great. This is just a final question on inquiry points. We mentioned them. They are mandated to be created by Article 10.1, and we have these two statements. Statement A: an inquiry point should answer all reasonable inquiries from other members on technical regulations issued by its government. Statement B reads: an inquiry point should answer all reasonable inquiries from other members and interested parties in other members on technical regulations. So the difference is it only about members, or is it about members and their interested parties? Which of the two is correct? B, correct, exactly. So this is just to show how the agreement already, in its wisdom, envisaged the need to provide as much information as possible to as many stakeholders as possible. So that means that if you're not necessarily in the central authorities of your government, but you have a query about an issue, you can contact the inquiry point, you can pose your question, ask for additional information, and they are required to provide. I think we'll now quickly take a look at keeping. This was simply just to recap at the end, so there is no need to go through this. And I think after that, then we can maybe have a coffee break, or maybe we go to recap. Let's see a little bit. We are in the hands of the organizers. Okay, so I will speak from here because this is partly a presentation and partly I will do a few demos on the website just to show you exactly how you do certain things, because that's potentially what you're most interested on. So we've been speaking about EPIN, this great platform. Now let's see a little bit in more detail what this is all about. Really? Oh, okay. That's funny. I'll have to speak with a colleague back in Geneva, but we'll deal with that later. So let's start with the history of EPIN. And simply just to show you how much progress we've made. So originally, when the Secretariat started dealing with these issues of online tools to assist transparency, we had two very useful tools. The IMS, which was the Information Management System, and then we had the notification services, the NSS, to provide notifications online. And then later on, there was this idea to be able to give authorities and exporters, traders, maybe the opportunity to receive alerts on their email account with respect to new notifications. And that's how EPIN was created. And then over the years, then members started thinking, but hold on, I think I see quite a bit of an opportunity for synergies here. And then people in the Secretariat then started thinking more thoroughly about these issues, and they realized that you could easily combine those three into one. And that's how now we have the upgraded SPS and TBT EPIN platform, in which you can do all those issues. You can submit your notifications, you can also check notifications and STCs, so it has a database, and you can also receive alerts on your email account. So now all of those things are done by EPIN, and then on top of that we have a more thorough, more complete trade concerns database where you can actually navigate what's happening in the community very easily. And we have e-agenda, which is something mostly for people who are directly involved on TBT matters, because it has to do with the organization of the TBT community meetings. So, as I was indicating, there are a few functions here. One is receiving email alerts, which is useful and significant because, as we saw yesterday when Erik was running through the notifications, we are receiving over 3,000 TBT notifications per year, covering all sorts of products, from industrial to food products to cybersecurity, you name it. How can you cope with that as an authority or as an exporter or as an industry association? It can be quite challenging. So here we will see how EPIN is a great tool to receive email alerts that are tailored to your needs. If you're only, let's say, our colleagues from the tea board, you're only interested in tea, maybe coffee, who knows, then you can only receive alerts about those products. If you are from the textile sector, then you can just focus on textiles. Then, as I mentioned, you can also search for notifications and trade concerns, so it has a very powerful database. And you also can find useful information with respect to each of the members' profiles in terms of their TBT and SPS presence. And you also have information on the inquiry points, so that you can easily maybe find an email address, a phone. In case you have a query, you can find the contact details there. So let's now do a demo, and for that I think I will have to go here. Am I showing? I'm not showing. Okay, so I need to, in a second, I'm going to try to show you. Actually, Wonderful. Okay, so this is the EPING website. As you can see, it's epingalert.org. And let me simply start with some really useful good news. It's an online tool offered by the WTO Secretariat that can be accessed by anyone and for free. So you do not have to be a government official. You do not have to pay for it. Anyone can register. So now I'm already registered here. Simply not to lose time on that, but if you are not registered, here you will see a tab that says register. You can go there, and the reason why it's important to register is if you're not registered, you can certainly search the database here. You can search for notifications, you can search trade concerns, all of that. But if you register, you have at least 2 added benefits. First, you can receive your tailored email alerts. And second, you can also save filters. And filters are particularly useful for government authorities that are in charge of a wide variety of products and stakeholders. Because you can then perhaps focus, if you're covering a wide range of products, you can focus on notifications related to, let's say, rice. You can focus on notifications related to textiles. You can focus on notifications related to apples. And then that allows you to more easily navigate a vast amount of information. So when you register, you can specify all that information in terms of your interests. And then you would start receiving your email alerts either on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. Now I'm registered here, so let me perhaps show you. Let's go on and search for some notifications. So that's the tab here called search, and here we're searching for notifications. So now that I'm registered, it has my registration filter as a default, but I can also clear that filter here so that I start from a blank page. So I'm now searching all notifications, and as you can see here, there are 81,000 in the database, 81,000 notifications. So as you can tell, there are many things to find here, and you can do this in a very simple way, or you can also provide more details that may refine your search. So you can simply do a free text search, and I'll show you in a moment how that works. You can also specify the notifying member, because maybe you can be interested only in, let's say, 2 or 3 markets. So you would be interested in just the notifications from those members. You can also indicate dates in case you are only looking for the latest developments. You can search in the SPS area, in the TBT area, or both. And then there is this tab here, search more fields, that allows you to then add more information. We had this discussion about HS codes. Well, you can also try to add HS codes, and that may help you perhaps have a better set of results. You can add ICS codes. You can even add objectives pursued by measures. So you know, if it's in the area of SPS, maybe you're thinking about animal health issues, or if you're in the area of TBT, maybe consumer information. Well, you can specify that, and that will narrow your search. And then maybe I'm going to leave it at that for now. So maybe just to show you an example. So here, let's say, you know, these days environmental issues are quite important. So I'm interested in notifications related to waste products, because there is quite a bit of trade in waste, and some of these measures are, you know, maybe trade barriers. Some of those measures are maybe trade conducive. So there's quite a bit of elements going on here. And I'm actually very interested in the European Union, because I want to know their latest regulations. So I have just added European Union here. And now I'm going to show you a few interesting things. So you have here 129 notifications from the European Union on issues related to waste. So look at this, it's organized chronologically, and look at this interesting notification, 953. It's a proposal for a regulation on packaging and packaging waste. And it was received just 2 weeks ago, 27th February. And look at this little clock here. It tells you the deadline for providing comments. So if you are maybe in the inquiry point, or if you are an authority that is interested in these matters, or a stakeholder, you know here the clock is ticking. I need to make sure I provide my comments before this date. So that's already very useful because you don't have to go to the notification; it's there. And now let's maybe scroll down a bit just to see what else we find. And look what we found here. So we have this notification 778. It's also on waste issues. And if you click here, you actually go to the text of the notification, and now this is familiar to you because we just saw it a minute ago. It's the very same format. So you have the notifying member, the authority responsible, and you have all the boxes that provide that information. So that's easily accessible there. You have that in 3 languages, English, French, and Spanish. But what else do you have? Do you see here this exclamation mark? That shows you that there is a related trade concern. So there is a trade concern raised by members with respect to this notification. So when you click here, it already shows you here. This is a related trade concern, STC 658. And here, if you click here, you can be redirected to key facts with respect to that STC. So look, this is an STC raised by India and China against the European Union. And it tells you in which meetings this STC was raised. So it's been raised in 3 meetings, originally by India, US, and Canada in October 2020. Then in February 2021, only by India, and now in June 21, India and China. And you have a link to the minutes here. You see, if I double click here, it takes me to the minutes of that meeting, so you can very easily see the discussion. What was the statement by India? What was the statement by China? What was the response by the EU? So you can do all of these very, very quickly. And this is useful because then you can see the actual developments. Now you can also look for trade concerns. Before we do that, hold on just a moment. I'm very conscious that I'm keeping you from the tea break, so I'll be quick because then I think we need to move on to other topics. But just to show you that here it's also possible to search for trade concerns. So here you have a very similar situation where you can do free text search, you can specify the members, and simply just to show you, let's imagine that I'm interested in food labeling. So I can do food labeling here, and I'm interested only in the TBT area, not SPS, just TBT. So then I specify that, and then here I get all of the STCs related to food labeling in the area of TBT. And you can access very quickly the STC. You can see which are the members raising, so look, quite a few, which are the members supporting, and then against which member the issue was raised. So this was just to show you very quickly how you can also access that. Then maybe let's just quickly see the information on inquiry points. So you can find inquiry points with respect to SPS authorities, SPS inquiry points and TBT, so we are interested in TBT matters, and we of course are interested in India, so we type India, and then here we have, is that, yeah. So that's the Indian TBT inquiry point. And if you're interested in another country, let's say the United States, then you type US and it gives you the email, the phone, etc. And then maybe, and this is just to wrap up, so we saw how this is a very useful tool to search for information and to receive alerts. But we had also seen this other function, which was providing notifications. So this will only pertain a few of you, maybe those that have to submit notifications. And for that, you have here the admin panel. The admin panel is basically where you can submit notifications, and this will only take 2 minutes. I would simply like to note that this new tool is quite useful because it allows for collaboration among various people. Because of course, as we all know, measures are not prepared by one person, and notifications are maybe not prepared just by one person or one authority. It's often multiple actors. So thanks to this, you can collaborate, and you have certain people that may have drafting rights only, and then many of them can collaborate on a single document, and then you have perhaps a few other actors that have submission rights, and then those are the ones in charge of submitting the notification. And here you can see also the way a notification is progressing from being just a draft to being completed, to being submitted, to being then approved by the Secretariat in terms of form, etc. And if you want to submit one notification, you simply have to double click here, and then you basically have a number of boxes that mirror these notification templates that we saw. And basically it's very easily, you can just type away, and you will be able to submit your notification. So now, I think the internet is a bit slow, but maybe if you can bear with me for 1 more minute, I will talk about the final function that pertains maybe internal collaboration. So here you can also do outreach activities. And when I speak about outreach, I mean outreach with respect to domestic stakeholders and outreach with respect to international stakeholders. So here, for those authorities that have admin rights, you can see all the users within your jurisdiction. So for the person in India that has the admin rights to EPIN, they will be able to know who in India has registered an EPIN. And that's very useful because that allows for engaging with those stakeholders on a more tailored basis. Because when you register, you can also provide all your information, where you come from, what sector, etc. So then imagine that you know that within my stakeholders I have the rice farmers, I have the textile producers, etc., etc. That allows you as an authority trying to communicate information with respect to notifications more easily, because EPIN allows you to group them, to start a chat within the domestic chat, or to group them and send them emails that may be containing notifications that are useful just to them. So that's a way in which you can also maybe engage with them more effectively. And then of course on the international front, you can also create chats, international chats, in which you can ask questions to other inquiry points, maybe that are regulating, and you can also provide additional information. So you may recall that maybe yesterday or the day before, I was mentioning how now it is very common to see members providing unofficial translation of final measures in the international chat. And they simply do it for the sake of transparency, providing more transparency. So let's say, once again, simply we have these measures by Brazil. So there, of course, their measures are drafted in Portuguese. Well, now very often, the United States, they do an unofficial translation of the measure, and they share that unofficial translation with the wider world through the international forum that can be seen by everyone. So I'll finish here. Thank you so much for your interest, your question, and thank you for bearing with me past the time. If you have any questions, maybe we can also take them after the break, because there will be a few more sessions here, but Erik and I are very flexible, so we can take them up also after the break. Now I'll give the floor back to one of my colleagues here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mateo, for that insightful session and the hands-on session as well.